staying on the story with the Middle East conflict at this point, Toby Fricker joins us from Amman, Jordan. Is the Chief of Communication and Partnerships at UNICEF South Africa. Toby, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Susan.
Since we last spoke, perhaps you could speak to the severity and the impact of the war on children from your vantage point.
Yeah, no, since we last spoke, I would have hoped to be able to say that the situation has improved, but clearly it hasn't. Day in, day out, we're still seeing children being killed and injured at horrific numbers. So that's now more than 4,000 children reportedly been killed and many, many others injured. At the same time, we still have the civilian hostages, including children who were abducted, who still haven't been released, and we continue to call for their release. And again, we still are pushing on being able to bring in more life-saving humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip and to be able to move that around in a safer way to at least alleviate some of the suffering and get particularly into shelters where people are still clustered together in very densely populated areas.
On the back of that, because both sides in this war have suffered and obviously lost dozens of children, the UN demanding a ceasefire, which you've just alluded to as well. We've heard from the Secretary General, Guterres, as well. At this point, how impactful will your work be in providing humanitarian aid for those who have been affected, given the severity and the escalations and tensions?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very difficult. I mean, the hostilities are still extremely intense. Particularly in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, though there's no safe space, no safe place for children and civilians right now. So humanitarian aid, moving humanitarian supplies around to medical facilities, to shelters, is very, very difficult. We've seen the dangers. I mean, the UN Palestine Refugee Agency, UNRWA, have had, I think it's 89 staff members now killed. That's the highest number of UN staff members ever killed in a conflict. UNICEF have staff members inside Gaza Strip have lost family, children. So it's very, very difficult. But we are able to provide some, for example, safe water through one of the UNICEF desalination plant that we've run and have done for a number of years is operational at minimal capacity. We are providing some safe water, but it's really what I'd say is life-saving water in terms of sort of around 3 litres per person per day, which is just about enough. But nowhere near what it should be at the minimum of around 15 litres. And we are still getting some supplies in, but at a very sporadic sort of basis, not nearly enough for the immense challenges that everyone's living through right now.
Absolutely. One can only imagine at this point, and because of the tensions escalating and no end in sight as we speak, are there concerns about the fighting spilling over into other countries and this, escalating into a regional conflict? How are you managing on that front? What's the scale of your operation or preparation thereof in view of those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, there are very real concerns, that the situation can spiral out of control, can move more regionally. We're already seeing in the West Bank area the highest level of conflict-related violence in 20 years. Even before October the 7th, that was a very high number, and we've seen Israeli children killed, and now and also many Palestinian children killed. And so the violence there is a massive concern. UNICEF is working in the area to provide psychosocial mental health support that we have been doing for many years. And we also work with the education system there as well. But many schools have closed even outside the Gaza Strip. They've closed because of insecurity, harassment. It's very difficult for children to move around safely. So there are big concerns that this could spill over further. But we hope, for the sake of every child, wherever they are inside Gaza Strip, Israeli children in the West Bank, wherever in the region, that we can come to our senses and have this humanitarian ceasefire and de-escalate the situation.
Toby, perhaps you could just remind us about some of the immediate needs at this point, and also, for those who are not privy to the conditions of war and really what is unfolding, perhaps you could paint the picture of the realities faced by children as we're speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first reality is that what we need is for the hostilities to stop, because children are still being killed and injured, as I said, very, very high, like massively high numbers, which is horrific. The second thing is, we now have inside northern Gaza, children who are essentially sort of trapped in this area of very intense hostilities, and it's very hard for UNICEF and for others to actually even know the numbers there right now. But in other places, people have been displaced. So around 1.5 million people have been displaced to seek shelter and safety in other areas, or relative safety. So they're in, for example, schools, where they're living in schools. So the real need now is to be able to provide safe water to those shelters where you have so many people in a very small area. And then to improve sanitation services, bring in toilet facilities, because we have a real risk of outbreak, waterborne diseases and others, when you're living so closely together. So we are getting in some hygiene kits, for example, water purification tablets and other services, but it's very limited for what is needed. And the same with the medical facilities. The hospitals are really on the brink. They're pushed to maximum capacity, and they need urgent medical equipment and supplies.
And so with these search and rescue operations that are underway and the limited access, what are the sentiments on the ground about the traditions and rituals that are also associated with those who have passed or who are suffering? How are people coping with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. It's hard for me to say. I mean, our staff members, have spoken day in, day out about the sort of horrors that they're living through, and the distress and the family members they've lost. And even when there's been these communication blackouts, so there's been like 3 times where people have been completely isolated, not being able to contact friends, family, and we as UNICEF haven't been able to contact our staff inside the Gaza Strip. So at times it's very hard to even get any information and to be able to then coordinate humanitarian assistance as well. But you're right, the situation is so acute still right now, 1 month on, that it's very difficult to have any sense of normality or any sense of anything going back to some form of everyday life, even though that has to go on. Women who are giving birth, children with health issues who need support, children living with disabilities who are struggling to survive, to do anything. So it's really, the situation is really catastrophic.
Toby, thank you for your time with us on the SABC, for weighing in on that matter. Toby Fricker, joining us from Amman, Jordan, Chief of Communication and Partnerships at UNICEF South Africa, really shining a spotlight on the impact of the Israel-Hamas war, what it's had on children, and really where to from here. We'll leave that conversation there for now.